Which NFL coaches are the greatest in the game today? Welcome, football fans, to another NFL tier rankings video on the Bottom Line View. In this video, I rank all 32 NFL head coaches, including the 7 new head coaches. That's right. We're going Mike Vrabel, Ben Johnson, Liam Cohen, Pete Carroll, Aaron Glenn, Kellen Moore, and yes, even Brian Schottenheimer. We're ranking every coach in the NFL today. From the worst, the guys that probably should be fired, to the best, the geniuses of the sport. If that sounds good, Gronk, spike the like button, and don't forget to subscribe for more NFL off-season position rankings just like this. This is, of course, my way too early NFL head coach rankings entering 2025. And the way that I will be ranking the coaches in this video is by thinking about a neutral situation. I don't know who my quarterback is. I have no idea how good my offensive line is or my defense. I have no idea what the roster has in store for this coach. All I know is that I need a coach to take my team from scraps and make them competitive and make them a contender. That is how I will rank every coach in this video, including the new coaches. And I'll give you my thoughts and opinions on whether or not I like or dislike the new coaches. Do I love them? Do I hate them? Do I think they're inspired choices? Or I really feel like I don't really know why they hired this guy? So let's get to it, guys. Let me know in the comments your opinion, as always, on my list. I love hearing from you guys. Loved your opinions on the quarterback list. Really appreciate that, guys. The team tier list. If you want me to do another tier rankings or something way too early for the NFL 2025 season, let me know in the comment section below. Let's get to the tiers, guys. Let's waste no more time. Okay. So first, explaining the tiers. All right, we've got quite a few here because we've got to be ranking new coaches as well as sustained, experienced coaches that we know what they are. So first, we've got the Burger King that may or may not. Okay, we are a big Burger King channel. All right, shout out to the man, the myth, the legend. All right, but Burger King, BK, at the top, that might give you a little bit of an indication on what that tier is going to exist and why it exists and who's going to be within it. Then we have the miracle work or miracle workers of the NFL. These guys are above and beyond even genius level intellect. They are incredible. I don't know how they do what they do. Geniuses, as in they're elite coaches. They're fantastic. I really have very little to complain about when it comes to their coaching. Good is like they're a good coach. They're mostly a positive influence on their team, but they're probably not perfect or far from it. Inspired choice is a new coach that has never coached before, but I really do like this guy. Fine is he's probably established. We kind of know that he's kind of average. He's mid, he's solid, but he's not amazing. Okay. Do better is a coach that is established, but yeah, I feel like the team could do better. I feel like there's a guy out there that they could replace him with, and they could probably be better off, okay? Why him is, why did they choose this guy? A new coach, I don't really know why he's the choice. And then fire him is, yeah, he sucks. He's terrible. I don't know why he's an NFL head coach. He shouldn't be coaching in the NFL. Okay, so those are our choices for the tiers. You guys let me know what you think of the tiers and the choices within them. Okay, let's get started. And how I want to do this is I want to begin with these 7 new NFL head coaches. And I wanted to begin this way so that I can make this 2 separate videos for you guys to enjoy. So let's begin by breaking down in depth the 7 new NFL head coaches and my tier ranking for each individual. Let's start it off with Aaron Glenn of the New York Jets. Aaron Glenn, I feel... Now, just to give you an idea, within these tiers, you can put the new coaches in the why him, in the inspired choice. Okay? 2 categories. Obviously, you're not going to fire a new coach. Obviously, a new coach can't do better because he's never really been established. Okay? And we don't know if he's good or a genius or anything like that. So, when it comes to Aaron Glenn, first, let's break him down. Okay? Aaron Glenn, I think his strengths as a coach are his ability to lead men. I think he is tough. I think his vision for defense, his mentality for the way and the style at which his Detroit defense performed was physical, was in your face, was aggressive, and bite kneecaps, exactly as Dan Campbell wanted, right? Aaron Glenn, a former corner in the NFL, is obviously going to have an upper hand in terms of being a player's coach because he has plenty of experience being a great player in the NFL. He was a very good player in his day. He also has experience working under successful coaches like Sean Payton and Dan Campbell, and he's been around some of the better offensive minds throughout his career as well. I think as a coach, the negatives would be I'm not convinced about him, obviously, from the offensive side of the football. I don't think that he's going to have much influence on a development of a quarterback, a development of an offense, of an offensive scheme. Those are all things that I do think are crucial to success nowadays. An offensive coordinator that can have vision, a great play caller, all that sort of things. And just the fact that he's a defensive coach does not allow him to do that. He's going to have to be fantastic on defense. And personally, I don't ever feel like he's ever led a great defense. I don't think he's ever had one season in his career where he has established himself as a great defensive play caller or a great defensive coordinator. Some people would argue that was this season for his ability to get the most out of the least, but that certainly did not show up in the playoffs. I would also say that Aaron Glenn has a tendency to be stubborn, and he has a system, man coverage, right? We're going to stop the run and load the box. We're going to be aggressive. We're going to blitz. But he does not try to persuade himself to change or switch or adapt. And that is not something I like. I am from the Patriot school of thought. I'm a Belichick guy through and through. I was basically groomed as an NFL fan through the vision of Bill Belichick. And when I think of Bill Belichick, I think of versatility. I think of game-to-game, week-to-week game planning. And I know that's something that really no coaches can really pull off. But I do like the idea of being versatile. I do like the idea of changing with your personnel and your thought of your team dependent on the players. I think that is a sign of a good coach. And to me, I have not seen that with Aaron Glenn. So personally, because I would not hire Aaron Glenn as a head coach, I put him in the why him category. I think there are things that you can get behind from a leadership standpoint, but I am very, very, very skeptical about his ability to actually be a coach at a high level against the best coaches in the NFL, especially being that he's a defensive one, and in my opinion, not one of the better defensive minds in the NFL. So I think this is not my favorite hire, for sure. Next up, we have Ben Johnson. I like how we went Detroit. So this is the other Detroit choice, of course. Ben Johnson is, in my opinion, for my money, one of the best offensive minds in football right now. And so that's a first check mark in his favor. He's an offensive-minded coach. He's a guy that has put together arguably the most well-rounded, balanced offensive attack in the NFL for the past 2 seasons. He has resurged, right? Like resurrected Jared Goff's entire career in some ways. Like the offensive line in Detroit, the talent that he's had at his disposal, certainly fantastic. But his ability to work a running game, in my opinion, with many layers to it, like his vision for the running game, the plethora of the running game that he approaches like every week with, whether it be zone run, whether it be a power type of style of run, whether it be, just the different versatility that he can bring to the running game in terms of his play calling and design. I think that is special. I think his ability to tie together play action and the run game is special. I think his ability to find, elaborate schemes and creativity, that is special. And I do give him most of the credit when it comes to Detroit's offensive success. I think Dan Campbell does have an influence, but I feel like Ben Johnson is the creative engine that stirred the drink. And that's what I'm worried about with Detroit moving forward, to be honest. But for him, I think one of the things that I'm not in love with Ben is he doesn't have a big personality. He does kind of feel like a little bit of a geek. He does kind of lean towards more of the Josh McDaniels side of the spectrum than the Sean McVay side of the spectrum, which I'm a little bit worried about. Now, can he be a Kyle Shanahan? That will be the question. Can he get his players to be, inspired by him, and can he be a teacher at an elite level to the point where he is respected for his knowledge of the game and for his ability to be one of the best at what he does? Can he prove that, right? Because if all he's going off of is his reputation in Detroit and he can't get the players to buy into his culture or his personality or his leadership, and he can't be respected for the man, that is going to be difficult no matter how smart you are at X's and O's. Because at the end of the day, I think coaching is more so about the leadership and about setting your players up for success and their players believing in you than it is about the X's and O's. I do think it heavily does lean towards that side of the spectrum. So for Ben Johnson, he has questions to answer, but I do think this is an inspired choice because I think at the end of the day, situation aside, right? We know why he was hired. We know that he was hired before Caleb Williams. We know that he was hired to get the most out of Caleb Williams. But situation aside, whenever you can go out and you can hire one of the best offensive minds that has ran one of the best offenses in the league for the past couple of years, that is an inspired choice because you want to find a guy like that ideally, and you want to keep him as your coach. You think about the best teams in football, and you think about the most successful franchises right now in the NFL, and almost all of them are ran by offensive-minded coaches. And if they're not, they probably have a great, talented quarterback like Buffalo or the Ravens. And I think many could argue that the difference between the Chiefs' success and the Ravens and the Bills' success is the coach, being that the Bills and the Ravens don't have an offensive coach. They have defensive or special teams-driven coaches, while Andy Reid is an offensive-driven coach that is partnered with a talented quarterback. Okay, so yes, I think this is an inspired choice for sure with Ben Johnson. I'm a fan of his offense. We'll see if he can come together as a full all-around three-phase type of coach. Okay, next we've got, this went back out of order. So we're going to have to find the next new coach on the list. So we have Brian Schottenheimer. Brian Schottenheimer, I'm going to go with why him just right off the bat, and then I'm going to explain why. Because I feel like a lot of people are pretty negative when it comes to Schottenheimer's hire, and I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that it was very simple-minded. It was very, unimaginative. That's the best way to describe it. I could see Schottenheimer being a good coach. If you actually look at his resume, you look at all the places he's been, you look at the positions he's filled, he's been an offensive coordinator in 3 or 4 different locations. He's a son of an all-time great head coach in Marty Schottenheimer. He has seen multiple generations of football. He's grown up in football. And you could also get the sense of him being a pretty decent leader and actually being an all-around good coach. I could certainly see that with Schottenheimer. My problem is that it feels a lot like a Jason Garrett-like hire for, Jerry Jones. It feels like the easiest option, the safest pick. It feels like the guy that Jerry is comfortable with over the most inspired choice. And that's where I get caught up and I'm like, why him? Could we not have found somebody a bit more inspired in terms of a bit more relevant, a bit more accomplished in recent years. It feels like, yes, Schottenheimer has technically ran the Cowboys offense, but he's not been a play caller. I do wonder if he's going to be the play caller for Dallas, because he used to be a play caller. A long time ago, he used to be a play caller in Seattle, in New York. He was the play caller for the Mark Sanchez Jets. That's how long this guy's been around in terms of running like an offense on his own. Okay. But, then again, this is a guy that was a son of a great coach, and he's been in the NFL for a long time. And yes, he does drive offensive, but I could see how if you could partner some good coaches around him, he could be a guy that could bring a vision together. Like, I could argue that. I can see that. But at the same time, I'm not sure that he's better than Mike McCarthy. He's certainly not as proven. He's certainly not as accomplished. So there are a lot of questions here because he has not recently been a play caller for a great offense as an offensive-driven guy. He is not a great defensive coach. He's obviously not a defensive coach. So it just feels like the comfortable choice. And that's where I'm like, why him? Okay? So that's why I have him in that category. Next up, we have Kellen Moore. So Kellen Moore, a former Dallas guy. We went to Detroit to Dallas. He was Philadelphia's offensive coordinator this past season, had a good game in the Super Bowl. When watching Kellen Moore's offenses in recent weeks and just over the course of the season, I feel like he wasn't like super imaginative, but to be fair to Kellen Moore, I feel like he didn't need to be. He had the best offensive line in the league, and he had a generational running back, and he really pressed the right buttons with that unit. When it came to Jalen Hurts, he did peak at the right time, and when it came to the Super Bowl, he gave Jalen Hurts all the answers he needed for success. That's as much as you can ask. NFC Championship and Super Bowl, the run game was a little disappointing in the Super Bowl from Kellen Moore's perspective, and Saquon didn't have the best game, but they did enough to win, and they had a game plan that worked, and they had enough play calls that sparked the offense. To me, like, Kellen Moore, he's been a solid offensive coordinator. He's been a solid play caller. I kind of wonder, he's young. I think he'll be the youngest coach in the NFL when he gets his start. I don't know if it's the look of him or what it is. He's a former quarterback. Obviously, he had to lead teams to a certain degree. He was great in college, as a quarterback. He was, very highly thought of. But maybe I'm judging a book by its cover. But to a certain degree, I don't get the aura or the presence from him that I would want from a coach. I've never really listened to much of what, Kellen Moore has said outside of just watching his offenses perform, watch how he he calls plays. I will say he's led multiple really good offenses in Dallas. He's worked with multiple quarterbacks, Dak Prescott, Justin Herbert, Jalen Hurts, multiple styles of quarterbacks. He's had success to a certain degree in every single situation. He's been well respected. He's not just been in one location, okay? He's a former quarterback, so he'll see the game through that lens, which is always advantageous. But from a leadership standpoint, a toughness, I don't get that from him. I don't get that aura. So I kind of feel like he's a fine hire, right? I don't see him as an inspired choice. I don't think he's like one of the best hires I've seen. He was the last coach to be named for a reason. So I am going to put him in the why him category, okay? I mean, I guess you could say like fine if you wanted to include this category, but to me, like, I like him. I'd say I approve this decision over these two. So, like, if I were to rank it, I'd probably go like this to a certain degree, right? But I don't love Kellen Moore as a hire, okay? Next up, we've got Liam Cohen. Liam Cohen had some Sirianni, some Gannon in his little press conference there with the whatever he did with the Duval or whatever he did there. He doesn't know how to say Duval correctly. He's tried multiple times. He does appear to be a little bit of a geek, but I really like his offense. I really enjoyed watching him call plays for Tampa. I thought he was low-key a wizard this past season. He was the first coordinator for them, including Canales. Leftwich the last few years to be able to get the most out of the running game, and he made the biggest difference in that regard in terms of his ability to call plays for the run game and set up an effective run game. Now, some of that had to do with the improvement at center, improvement at running back, things like that as well. But I thought he also showcased how the offense could operate in terms of making life easy on Baker Mayfield, getting the most out of Baker, having the best Baker Mayfield season of his career. A lot of short passes, yards after catch, manufactured within the offense, which is on an offensive coordinator, in my opinion. I thought that the balance was there. The play action was there. They utilized their pieces. Chris Godwin extremely well. Mike Evans extremely well. Bucky Irving extremely well. Every single good, legit player within the offense was utilized to the best of their ability. He got a lot out of McMillan as a rookie later in the season. He got a lot out of weaker or kind of people that we thought were washed, like Sterling Shepard. You know what I mean? So he really did a great job all around in all phases of an offense. I do wonder how he operates as a head coach of a team, but he did also develop Will Levis, so that also gives him credit at the college level. And he's ran an offense in multiple locations at college, NFL for a few seasons. He was around Sean McVay in LA in terms of being around that very smart staff. We've seen good coaches come from that location. I think this is an inspired choice because I feel like other than Ben Johnson, this was the best possible offensive-minded play caller, play schemer overall that you could find. And despite the awkwardness and the dorkiness, I feel like he could work, especially in a place like Jacksonville. And I do think, even in terms of the inspired decision to get him to uplift Trevor Lawrence, that makes a lot of sense. In a neutral situation, I would also want someone like Liam Cohen, being that last year I thought that among all offensive minds, he was probably a top 5 play caller in the league, and that's a great start, okay? So Liam Cohen is an inspired choice in my opinion. Next up, who do we have? We've got Pete Carroll remaining and Mike Vrabel, okay, right? So Mike Vrabel is next. Mike Vrabel is actually a veteran coach, so I can rank him anywhere I want on this list because I've seen him coach before as an NFL coach. I've never seen Schottenheimer, Aaron Glenn, Kellen Moore, Ben Johnson, or Liam Cohen. So they are technically in different categories because they're new, fresh faces that we've never seen as head coaches. Mike Vrabel and Pete Carroll we have seen as head coaches before, so I'm going to do my best to put them in spots where I feel like they best fit. Mike Vrabel, in my opinion, last time he was an NFL head coach, he was a great coach. I thought that his strength was to be able to motivate his players, get the most out of his team. And also, I thought as a game clock manager, he was arguably the best in the NFL. His ability to manage the game as a coach, be able to know when to call the right timeouts, situational football, and just overall craft a 3-phase game plan that put his team in a position to win. That is where I felt like Vrabel was excellent. I think that his team plays with great grit, toughness, and energy each and every week. And he is in the mold of, the guy that's beside him right there, Mike Tomlin. I feel like he's a great leader. I feel like, Patriots fans have been calling him like Bill Parcells-esque. He's not quite Bill Belichick in terms of the creativity of his mind and the scheme, but I do feel like he might be underrated in that regard defensively, for sure. But I feel like he's more about being a leader of men and leading a 3-phase football team. I think that Mike Vrabel is a genius coach. I maybe that's bold, considering he hasn't coached. He didn't coach last year. But I felt like last time he was a coach, and you guys can go back and check, he was in my top 10, okay? I think he's an amazing coach. I think his ability to uplift men, his ability to get the most out of his team, it's just intangible. You look at his underdog record. You look at his ability to win games as an underdog, and that speaks to, I feel like, his ability to uplift his team and get the most out of his team. So that's why I have Mike Vrabel in the genius category. Pete Carroll is obviously graded on a curve because we're not talking about Pete Carroll in his peak. We're talking about what Pete Carroll is now. Okay? Like, Pete Carroll is a Hall of Fame coach in football, in my opinion. Okay? USC program. You're talking about Seattle Seahawks, building that program. Great program builder, great culture builder. And that is why he was selected to be the coach of this team. That is why you can't argue that the why him category makes sense for Pete Carroll, because the why is obvious. Why did they hire Pete Carroll? Because he's a program builder, and that's what they need in Las Vegas. They need a culture. They need an establishment, okay? They need a franchise pointed in the right direction, all right? So then you talk about, okay, is he still good as a coach? That's an interesting question, because last time we saw him, okay, Mike Macdonald pretty much had the same record. So that's interesting. That being said, McDonald's taking over for Pete's team. He has to kind of rework it and recraft it in the way that he sees it, fit. Pete, I feel like, is a more experienced coach in terms of like understanding the day-to-day, understanding game management. I feel like he's always good in that category. I've never had a problem with him in that category. I do feel like he leads his team well. He inspires his team well. He has great energy. I would say that schematically, he is probably weak, which is why he was fired, in my opinion. Like, he is getting older. He's kind of past his prime in football intelligence, right? But in terms of leadership, he is still excellent. So I would probably put Pete in fine, because I think he's not going to give you a necessary edge you need in a scheme sense, but I do feel like he will raise the floor of your football team because he is a professional and he knows what he's doing. But I don't really feel like he's the same guy he used to be. So that's why I'll put Pete Carroll there. All right, now we can get to the rest of the NFL, okay? So beyond just the coaches that were new. So let's get to the other coaches, beginning with Brian Callahan. Bro, I don't know why I forget this guy's name all the time. I'm not gonna lie. I would put Brian Callahan in, honestly, fire him. I think, like, on the surface, he's only coached one season. I thought he proved absolutely nothing within that season. I didn't like a single thing about the Tennessee Titans. And in every facet, from Mike Vrabel's team to Brian Callahan's team, they got worse. Okay? Like, they added talent on defense. They added talent to the offense. The roster of the Titans this past season compared to the one that Mike Vrabel had in 2023. And this is another reason why Mike Vrabel's a genius, okay? This is why you have to compare the situations. The Titans were a better roster, and the team got worse. Okay? And Callahan was brought in there to improve the offense, to run an offense, to improve Will Levis, to develop Will Levis, to make the offensive line better, to make the offense better. And he didn't do that. Okay? And the quarterback went backwards. That situation was a disaster. He had very little command of his team. He had very little respect. So, honestly, from what I've seen, I think he's probably the worst coach in the league. So that's why I have to put him in the fire him category. Brian Daboll. Daboll's interesting because I think he's been handed a poor hand, okay? I feel like he has talent as a coach, as a overall play caller, as an overall offensive coach. I think he's solid. I feel like I kind of like his fire. I like his energy. I think that as a leader, there's things that are inspiring about him. Like, I could definitely see that within his personality. I think at the same time, there have been complaints about maybe he's a little bit of a dick. I'm not exactly sure. I'm not in the locker room. But that might just be because the Giants are just like a pathetic franchise. I don't know. But that being said, he's had a very poor quarterback position. He hasn't had the best rosters. I don't think he's been aided by the best general manager in football or anything like that. So it's really hard to say. In my opinion, I think Daboll is a good overall football coach. The question is he a good overall head coach. And I don't think the success as of late would tell you that he deserves to be here. So the question is he do better or is he fine? And in my opinion, I'm trying to separate the situation he's in from what he is as a coach. And I kind of feel like recently he hasn't really been able to get the most out of his team, but it's hard to tell, man. The defense, he hasn't had a good feel for the defense. The offensive line has not really improved. The run game has been inconsistent. The quarterbacks have kind of really ruined the offense, so it's hard to say. But I thought he had such a good year with Daniel Jones in the first season. And that was the best I've ever seen Daniel Jones play. And I think a lot of that had to do with Brian Daboll. But I think you have to put him in do better just because, like, I think he has to do better to keep his job. He's definitely on the hot seat, and he definitely needs to prove that he's really an influence for the positive on this team. I don't think over the last couple of years you can truly say with a straight face that he has positively influenced the results of this team. If anything, he's been a negative influence. So I would put him in the do better. I don't think I would quite put him in fire him because I think he needs a year without Daniel Jones to kind of prove himself, and we'll see. Okay, Andy Reid is up next. I think we know where he is going. He's the Burger King, all right? Andy Reid eats burgers and he beats your football team. Andy Reid has accomplished a lot. In my opinion, he's a top coach of all time. Maybe not the greatest, but certainly in the discussion. In my opinion, the greatest offensive mind of his generation, I would say. He's been to multiple NFC championships, multiple AFC championships. He's been to multiple Super Bowls with different quarterbacks, and he's seemingly won in any sort of situation that you've ever put him in. Philadelphia, Kansas City, Donovan McNabb, Alex Smith, Patrick Mahomes. Doesn't really matter, okay? Andy Reid is a genius when it comes to, I think, uplifting offensive talent and finding what they do best. Offensive line, wide receiver, running back, quarterback, hasn't really mattered. Tight end, he's been able to produce with any sort of position on the offensive side. He is somewhat dependent on having a strong defensive coach on his sideline as well. I feel like the teams that have been at their best with Andy Reid have had strong defensive influences, from Steve Spagnuolo to also Jimmy Johnson, I believe was his name, in Philadelphia. So, Andy Reid is the best coach in the NFL, and he's on a tier by himself for his consistency and for his ability to prove it in so many different ways and layers. But perhaps the most impressive is that he has been able to convince people, an entire generation, an entire fan base, that Patrick Mahomes is on the same tier as Tom Brady. And that is probably the most convincing thing that any coach has ever done. So I give him credit for that. Next up, we've got Dan Campbell. Dan Campbell, in some ways, is very similar to Mike Vrabel, right? I think Dan Campbell is interesting because when you think of Dan Campbell, you don't think of a genius, okay? You don't, intellectually, you don't think of a genius. But I think Dan Campbell is fantastic in terms of emotional intelligence. This is something I've never really talked about with Dan Campbell, but I think the most admiring aspect of his coaching is also one of the more irritating aspects of his coaching, which is like the fact that he's willing to cry at the podium, or the fact that he is so heart on his sleeve driven. He is very emotional. He is very gutsy. I'm not sure how great of a schematical coach he is. I'm not sure how much Ben Johnson has driven the offense. I'm not sure how much Dan Campbell has driven the offense. I don't really know, to be honest. I do think as a leader of men, he's very, very good. And I do think over the last couple of years, he has made the Lions one of the most competitive, ballsy, gutsy football teams in the NFL. They clearly play with a passion. They play with an identity, and they wear their heart on their sleeves just like their coach. And I think that Dan Campbell may not be a schematical genius, but I do think he's an emotional genius. So I'm going to put him in that category. Next, Dan Campbell. Dan Campbell to Dan Quinn. Dan Quinn, I'm going to put him in fine. Now, this is going to be a little controversial because he just had an amazing season. But I'm not trying to look at it as simply, just an amazing season. Because I feel like overall as a coach, he has been, I guess you could argue good, and I'd be fine with that, right? But I feel like Dan Quinn is very much like Pete Carroll. They're very similar. Dan Quinn is kind of like Pete Carroll's understudy. He's kind of like his Luke for Yoda. You know what I mean? He is kind of like very similar. They both have a lot of energy. They're infectious. They're defensive minded first. They have a certain style. I think Dan Quinn, the best thing about him this year, and the best thing about him throughout his career, is his ability to understand and evolve. His ability to continue to change and adapt and get better and understand, that he has to evolve. And I thought he did that when he was Atlanta's defensive coordinator to Dallas's defensive coordinator. He changed. He evolved. Or Seattle's defensive coordinator to Dallas's, he was Atlanta's head coach. And we've seen him Atlanta's head coach to Washington's head coach and how he has evolved and how he's changed. And I loved his approach in the playoffs. And I loved his aggression. I love the way that he can take a locker room and connect them together. So maybe I will move Dan Quinn up to good. You know what? I think the season that he had does deserve that. So I'll put him in that category. I don't think he's quite genius level, but I think he's a good coach. He's been to multiple NFC championships now, so I think you give them that respect. Dave Canales is up next. Dave Canales is interesting. I don't think you could say fire him after what he did with Bryce Young. Okay. He is young. He's still unproven. It's kind of hard to say. Could you say he's fine? That's fair. I do better is harsh, right? Did we expect much from Carolina last year? Not exactly. Was he really, really underprepared at the beginning of last year? Yes. Does he really have to have some success next year to keep his job? Probably. So I would probably say do better, just because it's not really a great description of him as a coach right now, but it's probably the right category just because I don't know if he's proven a lot. So do better does make sense. I would also say where would he rank in terms of offensive minds in the NFL? Probably not that high. Probably not that low, but probably not that high. I actually really like his presence too. I like his energy. I like his vibe. I do think that he does have a head coach sort of presence to him. Seems to be a good mix of young and youthful, but also enough command and respect from his team. I just need to see a little bit more from him. That's the biggest thing. DeMeco Ryans, I would say DeMeco is a good coach. I think he's flawed, but I think he's a good coach. I think as a defensive coach, I think he's one of the 3 to 4 best defensive coaches in the NFL. Honestly, I think what he's done with San Francisco and with Houston on the defensive side has been super impressive. I think, I thought he led the second best defense in football this year. And I think as a leader, I like the passion that he has. I like the fire that he brings to the sidelines. He's obviously a former coach. He's got a good presence to him, but he's also kind of soft in terms of he feels like a guy that's sort of understanding, but he's got a good mix of that, a good mix of toughness and just a smile. He's just it's hard to explain, but DeMeco has had success the first 2 years. He turned around the program with CJ Stroud, took them to the playoffs. The next year, he took them to the playoffs. He won the division. Now he's got to prove that he can elevate himself. So, Dan Campbell, Mike Vrabel, they've been to AFC championships. Okay, they've been number ones, or NFC, AFC championships. They've been number 1 seeds. Okay, they have established cultures, right? DeMeco's established a culture. Dan Quinn has had the success of these guys, right? But I feel like DeMeco, he's just needing to take it one more notch above. Okay, one more notch above. Next, Jim Harbaugh. Jim Harbaugh is interesting because he's had 1 year back in the NFL. I'm not trying to really look too far deep into his history as a coach because and the NFL changes. The NFL evolves, the NFL adapts, and the NFL is different than when he was coaching the first time in San Francisco. He had incredible rosters there as well. I would also say at Michigan, he was a great coach, but it took him a while to really build that program up to the point where they were dominant, right? I feel like with LA, he's got the situation that he wants. He's got the quarterback. He's got the ability to run the program. And this year will be a big offseason for him. Can he put the pieces around Herbert? And can he take the Chargers from a playoff team to a contender? And that will be the question for Harbaugh. He doesn't have to win the Super Bowl, but he's got to be maybe a little bit more successful in the playoffs, maybe a little bit more competitive. But getting that team to the playoffs after so many years of confusion and influx and inconsistency proves that he is still a good coach in the NFL. Okay, so I would probably put Jim in that spot, which is a good coach. You could argue that he's a genius coach, but I feel like he's just been so removed from the NFL for so many years that it's kind of hard to say. So I put him in good for now. Like, I wasn't overly impressed by anything they did from a schematical sense. I wasn't overly impressed by his coaching with the Chargers. It was kind of what I expected. He brought stability to that team. That's what I expected. Now, his brother, John, I would say is a genius coach. I think that he's proven over multiple tenures in terms of like multiple different designs of a football team that he can be successful. Whether it be Joe Flacco or Lamar Jackson, whether it be a defensive or an offensive-driven team, whether it's his ability to lead his team or understand how he needs to win a game, I feel like Harbaugh is one of the best there is. So I personally feel like in terms of building culture, building a team from the ground up, he would be a fantastic choice. My problems with Harbaugh, which is why he wouldn't be like miracle worker level, is the ceiling of Harbaugh. I understand that he won a Super Bowl like a long time ago, okay? And that's part of it. But I feel like right now, part of the reason that team has not won a Super Bowl does fall on Harbaugh. I mean, just as his counterpart within the AFC North has been unable to prove that he can win playoff games in this current day and age, Harbaugh is kind of on that hot seat too, that he needs to be able to prove that he can do this with Lamar, or else, he might be on his way out. But that being said, everything that he's done, especially even recently, they've been a great football team, number 1 seed last year. Great offense this year, great team this year. I think he's a genius level coach. Jonathan Gannon. I would say fire him. As much as I kind of admire what he's done in terms of his defensive approach and the abilities that he's been able to evolve and adapt that side of the football and get the most out of that side talent-wise, I don't think he's brought anything inspiring to the Cardinals. I don't think that he's particularly a difference maker in any way, shape, or form. I feel like he's extremely replaceable, and if you did fire him tomorrow and replaced him with somebody, I feel like they would probably be as good or better. So that's why I would say fire him. It's pretty simple in that sense. I also, with Gannon, I don't, even when I look at him, I just don't get the sense of he's an NFL head coach. Even when I see him on the sidelines, I'm looking at him on like, this guy just feels like a defensive coordinator. Like, it doesn't feel like he's a head coach. Kevin O'Connell, he's the coach of the year, so that's something. I think O'Connell is a genius coach. I think what he does extremely well, in my opinion, is I think that he has found a great rhythm between being a leader and being a schemer. I think that he has found that fine line of being a leader of men and being vocal and being tough on his team, but also being really creative and being a good play caller. And I just think he has a great vision for his football team. And I love his vocal command. That's something I'm really into, guys. I'm really into the speaking, okay? I don't know if you guys noticed, but O'Connell certainly has that. So I'm into that. I think he's a genius coach. Kevin Stefanski. At times, he's been genius level. I mean, he's definitely brought some teams to some big places. I kind of feel like Stefanski, he's been so up and down and all over the place. I'm going to put him in fine because I think he's a good offensive coach. I think that he's proven that with non-Deshaun Watson quarterbacks, he can have productive offenses. I don't think that's really the problem. My problem with Stefanski is that he is a little soft. And I mean that from like a outside looking in perspective on being firm in his stance and his opinion. He feels like somebody that is a scapegoat, somebody that is being held by a pair of strings and kind of like dangled by the Cleveland franchise. I don't think that he has enough firm in his leadership. That's where I'm a little lost with him. I do feel like he would benefit from maybe being in a different situation, franchise. I also don't look at him as like a genius level schematical coach, but I think he is a good one. So I would put him in the fine category. Kyle Shanahan, my boy, my guy. Kyle Shanahan is a miracle worker coach. I feel like it speaks to his ability to get to 2 Super Bowls with 2 different quarterbacks that most people would call average talents. It speaks to going to 4 NFC championships. I thought his best coach game of this season, it wasn't his best season by a long shot. They dealt with a lot of stuff, though. Okay, I think he was a little overwhelmed. The Niners have had a brain drain as of late. And I think getting back Robert Saleh on defense is really going to help him. Just as Andy Reid had to find Steve Spagnuolo, right? Like, sometimes guys need a little help. You know what I mean? But I thought his best game was against the Lions. I thought that was a thoroughly impressive game from Kyle. Just his leadership, his play calling within that game, their ability to go toe-to-toe with the Lions at that point in the season with all the players that they did not have just shows you how much of a genius this guy is. As an offensive mind, he is basically been captivating the NFL since 2008. He's been driving creativity. He's been driving the direction of offensive football. He's been the guy that most people have copied. For that alone, I think he is a miracle worker. I think, taking Brock Purdy from the last pick in the draft to the Super Bowl is something that not many coaches could do in the history of the NFL. So that's why I think Kyle Shanahan deserves to be in that spot. Matt LaFleur. This is interesting. Matt LaFleur, I would put he's definitely a great coach. Now the question is he a genius or is he a miracle worker? I would probably say I'd lean genius, but he is probably at the top of this list. I know I'm not really ordering it. Maybe I will at the end, but that's kind of where I would say he's right on the fringe. He hasn't quite been able to push through the glass window and break it. He hasn't shattered it, right? He hasn't gone to the Super Bowl yet. It's kind of what I mean. And also he had Aaron Rodgers. Like I feel like if Kyle Shanahan had Aaron Rodgers, he'd probably have 2 Super Bowls. You know what I mean? So that's the difference for me. We know how good of a play caller he is. I think he's low-key a good speaker. Low-key, I think he's a better leader than given credit for. But I think he's a very good schemer. And I think he's evolved as understanding the 3-phase game and understanding game management. I think he's become better in that aspect too. I just feel like that comes with maturity. He's always got a fresh haircut, so you got to give him that credit. Next, we've got Mike Macdonald. I can't really say Mike should do better because he's only had 1 year to really put his stamp on the team. And I felt like the team did get better as the year went on, especially his side of the ball, the defense. I would say that he's probably fine for now. I need kind of some more time to grow with him, but I like Mike Macdonald. I was a huge fan of the hire in Seattle. I thought it was the right decision over Pete Carroll, right? So I'd probably rather have Mike Macdonald than Pete Carroll if we were to put it in that direction right now. He's young, he's vibrant, and he brings an energy, but also a schematical difference to one side of the football. Mike McDaniel. Mike McDaniel, I would say, is also fine. And the reason I would say that is I feel like he's kind of like Mike and the other Mike in terms of, not in terms of being unproven. We kind of know what he is, but like they give a schematical advantage on one side, but they have proven very little in other aspects of their coaching. Leadership, being a three-phase tough football coach. I think Mike McDaniel, his biggest flaw is being soft. His biggest flaw is leading a soft football team, and that reflects in how they perform. That's been his biggest disadvantage. But I do think as an offensive mind, he's one of the better in the NFL. Mike Tomlin. Mike Tomlin has definitely declined, in my opinion, but he is very consistent. If anything, the Steelers are going to be very consistent. The problem with Mike Tomlin is he has not been able to win when it matters. And some of that is on the choices of quarterbacks and offensive coordinators over the last few years, and not having Big Ben Roethlisberger, who, by the way, is one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time, whether you believe it or not. Mike Tomlin has needed that help, and he hasn't had it. And, it sucks. But there's other coaches, like we've talked about with Kevin O'Connell, who had Sam Darnold and had Kirk Cousins. Kyle Shanahan, we talked about what he's been able to do with two mediocre talents at quarterback. We could talk about Matt LaFleur with Rodgers and Love. You could talk about Mike Vrabel bringing Ryan Tannehill to the AFC Championship. You could talk about all these guys, right? So the question is Tomlin still belonging in these categories? Because yes, he wins. Yes, he's consistent. But he's consistently a good team. Not a great team, a good team, right? These guys have all led great teams. Maybe not O'Connell, but O'Connell's been dealt kind of a tougher hand in some cases, Sam Darnold. But I feel like Tomlin, to me, this might be controversial. I think he's good. I don't think he's great. I think he's closer to being fired than winning the Super Bowl. So, yeah, I kind of think he's like Jim Harbaugh. Structure, that gives you a floor, the structure. But he doesn't have the ceiling. He's missing it. It's like it's gone or something. I don't know. Nick Sirianni. I think he's a good coach. Yeah, he won the Super Bowl. I give him credit. But like I've said many times, I think the MVP of that team and that franchise is Howie Roseman. I don't think it's Nick Sirianni. I don't think Nick Sirianni's in the top 5, probably. I think he's a good coach that needs good coordinators. We've seen that from year to year. We've also seen that he's a bit emotional. That can work in his positive, in his favor, also in his negative. I feel like he does need to be reined in to a certain degree. There's a reason he has his own personal bodyguard. But I would also say that he's unique. Like, he definitely stands out. He definitely has his own sort of niche. And that's a good thing. So I would also say, I don't really know what he does sometimes, but I feel like he has his fingerprints on this team in terms of their passion and their culture. So that's why I would say he's a good coach. Next, Raheem Morris, I would fire him. I think he's terrible. He's awful in clock management situations. I think he's a below average defensive coach. And I think he's a borderline clown. Nothing else has to be said. Sean McDermott. Oh boy, my boy. Sean McDermott. All right. So, I've often said that the Bills should fire Sean McDermott. But it's tough because, yes, should they fire him for the chance to win a Super Bowl? I think my struggle with McDermott is I feel like they might have to fire him to win a Super Bowl, which is not a good thing, right? But at the same time, he provides a floor for the team. He's a good leader. He's never had a bad season, really, with the Bills. I think maybe one, and that was Josh's rookie season. Other than that, even in the year previous to Josh, he led a good team. He usually has good defenses. He usually brings a good culture and a good toughness and a good, vibrant energy to this team. Like, he's well respected. So I think he's fine. That's the problem, though. He's fine. He's not great. And that's why they're not winning Super Bowls. He's just okay. He's nothing better than that, okay? Next, Sean McVay. Sean McVay is a miracle worker. I think he's proven that. Sean McVay is a very complete coach. When you think about a coach that you would build in a lab with the energy, the presence, the vocal tonality, the look, the scheme, McVay is one of those guys. I do feel like McVay has definitely gotten worse in terms of his offensive prowess and edge. But where he has proven his best advantage is his culture building and his teaching to young players. So I think he's a miracle worker level coach. And I would say this level here is like Hall of Fame caliber coach. I think Harbaugh has a pretty good case, but he was probably better a few years ago. Tomlin probably will make it, but again, past his prime. Harbaugh might be, if you put college in there as well. We'll see what LaFleur can finish with in his career. Pete's a Hall of Famer, but he's like 70, so Sean Payton. Sean Payton is a miracle worker. I think he is an elite coach in the NFL. I would argue that he should have won Coach of the Year. He took a rookie quarterback to the playoffs on a team that I thought might have been the worst in the NFL. That's all I got to say. I mean, I don't really need to say anything else. He's a great offensive coach, and I think this year he proved his ability to adapt with a different quarterback and completely change the identity of his offense. That is pretty impressive at his age, especially. Next, you have Shane Steichen, who I think do better. Steichen is a guy that they could fire, and I would understand it. They could keep, and I would understand it. He is a good play caller, overall decent offensive schemer, but I don't really love his ability to lead a team. And I feel like he is a little bit in his own head. Like, I feel like he's a little bit too centered on offense and not on the entire team. And I don't really get the sense that he is a Sigma out there on the sidelines. So I'm going to go with do better. Then we've got Todd Bowles. Todd Bowles, I can't say fire him because he's been in the playoffs 3 straight years. But I am not a big fan of Todd Bowles right now. I think he's always been a better defensive coordinator than a head coach. I would say do better. I think he needs, like, his side of the ball needs to perform better. It's a problem. Like, if it doesn't, he's got to go. I understand they've made the playoffs. I understand all that. But, you had Tom Brady. And then you've lucked into Baker Mayfield. You've lucked into 2 young offensive minds that the NFL deemed to be worthy of head coaching jobs. Right? And you've had a talented roster. So I can't really say that you're the reason you're winning a lot. I would also say that your side of the ball is a reflection on that. So yeah, Bowles also is just very quiet, like to himself and kind of archaic in some ways defensively. Like he needs to change a little bit. Zach Taylor, do better is clear and obvious answer. I mean, he's had some impressive moments in his career. He's won playoff games. He's been to a Super Bowl. He's been to AFC championships twice. But how much of that is the talent? How much of that is Joe Burrow? This guy just feels like he is not the driving force of his team, okay? So that's why I have Zach Taylor in do better. I feel like they could fire him, and I'd be intrigued about who they would go out and get. And I'd be like, maybe this would be an improvement. I could talk myself into that, right? That is a case of a guy that you're not super impressed by, okay? So those are my tiers, guys. That is how I see it. Let's just order this really, really quick. I think this is probably correct. I'll probably leave that. I mean, you could switch these 3 at like any given time and I'd be okay with it. After that, I feel like genius. Okay. I actually think O'Connell might be here, honestly. We'll put Campbell. We'll put Harbaugh. I don't know. That's really close. I don't really know. I'll just leave it. It's going to be too controversial. You guys let me know in the comments what you think. Thanks for watching. It's Mitch, and we'll see you in the next video. Peace.